Ready? Good morning, everyone. Would we please stand for a moment of silence at Pledge of Allegiance? Now the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting today, February 5th, 2019 to order. We have minutes to approve for January 29th. Commissioners, any questions or changes or motion to approve? Second, I have a first and a second. Any discussion? If none, please say aye for approval. Aye. Okay, commissioners' reports and comments. Vice President Baker, would you start, please?
Just like thank our staff again for all of the great work on getting the video and putting together the information for the state of the county this morning. I'd like to thank the Chamber for their involvement in that, and I thought it was a really, really good event for Washington County this morning. And also, I'd like to ask, I guess this is for Mr. Downey. I know we talked a month or so ago about the waste to energy information. Any updates on that, or the $250,000, when that's going to be brought to the commissioners or anything like that?
There are no updates. We can schedule a matter for closed session if you'd like to discuss it further.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Kiefer?
Yes. Would just like to comment on last week's day in Annapolis. I thought it was a really good event. We had a good turnout. I believe Paul Fry with the Chamber of Commerce said that may have been our largest turnout at the meet and greet social at the end of the day. But we got to meet with several different state legislators and committee chairs, and I think it was very fruitful and productive for us. And good job to the Community Coalition in Washington County for organizing that. Entire county staff for obviously their part in the process as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Court, we'll let you go in front of Mr. Wagner this time.
I just again want to thank the staff for how quickly they responded to the water main break there in Sharpsburg over the weekend, and that it's up and running. And now that I heard that the boiling water is off, that's an excellent job to the staff. And again, today's meeting was excellent from the chamber, and we have another one at 7 o'clock tonight. So hope to see people out there. Thank you.
Sort of echoing what everybody said. Someone I was talking to, I think it was Greg Snooks this morning, and I said, "Boy, what a turnout at this! What a turnout at this state of the county." And he said, "Well, if there was 50 people here, it wouldn't be good. We need 200 or 300, which I think we had over 200." But not a whole lot more comments. Just thanks everybody for everything they did to prepare that, and looking forward to this evening and the rest of the day. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioners. Again, a reminder, our meeting, State of the County at the College at Kepler Theater, is at 5:30 tonight. I do want to thank the Chamber and our staff for the presentation this morning over at Fountainhead. I was at Funkstown's Volunteer Fire Company over the weekend for their awards banquet, and I want to thank them for that invite. Once again, you sit there, you learn things. And I do want to, in a real note of seriousness, Boonesboro lost a firefighter. Dennis Reese was his name, suddenly unexpected. I think he was a retired federal firefighter. He may have been working at Fort Detrick, I believe, retired. And I think he is also associated with the founding of the ambulance and the fire company in so many ways. So, again, our thoughts go out to his family for his sudden passing. And that concludes my report.
Jeff, can I say one more thing? I wanted to thank also the county staff for last week on Commissioner's comments. I requested a list of county properties that might be able to be liquidated. And it was like the next day I got that. And they're working on it, so there seems like we've identified a few. That remains to be seen. I don't want to say that until everybody involved has really investigated it, but that was really quick service, county, so I appreciated that.
Any other commissioners want to add anything? Okay. If not, I'd like to go to Reports from county staff. Anyone? Mr. Hayes? Mr. Brown?
We'll be brief. David Hayes, Director of Emergency Services. I have with me Tom Brown, as the Assistant Director of Communications and Emergency Management, and also identified as our local emergency manager. And I just wanted to add to some of the comments about Saturday's water main break in Sharpsburg. You know, I received a call from Administrator Slocum at 7:30, and he had identified some issues, and I wanted to recognize Tom. And just as importantly, we had probably 6 to 10 emergency management volunteers that went down to the Sharpsburg EMS facility, where we set up a bottled water distribution point to provide drinking water for the duration. So just one more shout out and accolades to their efforts, and also thank you to Sharpsburg Fire and EMS for allowing us to use their facilities.
Thank you. Any other county staff would like to report?
Mr. Hayes, also, I do pay attention. You sent that email out a little after 3 a.m. this morning. Thank you, and that's pretty admirable that you are thinking about the county at 3 a.m. in the morning. That says a lot about the character of you. So I just wanted to thank you for sending us that email. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other county staff to report? Mr. Slocum?
Thank you, President Klein. First of all, the staff did a fantastic job. I do believe it was done entirely in-house, and we will get that confirmed with the state of the county, the cost savings to the county, and probably one of the most remarkable jobs done yet. So I would like to applaud the entire public relations and marketing staff for that effort.
Rob, do you know the cost that we incurred on doing that out of house in past years? I'd just kind of be interested to know those numbers.
I can get that for you, sir.
Thank you.
Yep. As Commissioner Wagner mentioned, we did get the property, and just going through my notes on what was requested last week, we did get the property list. I did meet with the interim city administrator, Mike Spiker. We had a very nice conversation about collaboration and joining with the city. That was quite nice to have a discussion about how we can work together. And I did want to thank on Sharpsburg Water, Danielle's office with PR and marketing, Dan's office with water quality, and Dave's office, who you've already heard from with emergency services. It was a complete team effort. And also a shout out to Mayor Spielman. When I called him, he was very gracious in the 500 plus customers that would be affected in his town. And the communication was excellent, and he was very considerate and patient with us while we got the measures corrected. So thank you to the mayor and the town for their patience with us through that event. I believe it was about 0 or below 0 that day, so it does stand to reason that a pipe did break. And that's about it for right now. Thank you, sir.
Any other comments from staff? Seeing none. We're a little ahead of citizens' participation, but if there's anybody here who'd like to participate now from the front row, please come forward. Name and address, please.
Morning, gentlemen and ladies.
Morning.
My name's Gary Rohr. Address is 19818 Marcia Court, Boonesboro. It's almost 30 years ago this spring that the county administrator convinced me to leave my position in Howard County and come to work for Frederick County, that was before Howard, come to work for Washington County, and eventually became your first public works director. Now, why do I say that? I guess my timing is pretty good based on Commissioner Wagner's comment about surplus property, but one of the things I had mentioned to Commissioner Klein just a week or two back is that I wanted to come, and actually I probably should have done it to the previous board, but some of you are still present from that board. And thank you for seeing what we now call Southern Boulevard to its fruition. There's still another important leg left of that to build, which you're probably more than aware now that you're approaching your capital improvements program budget. Now, I would encourage you to work with the city to keep that on track, because it, as most of you know, it leaves Frederick Street and heads pretty much northeast and comes in to a point at Edgewood Drive, somewhere below what is the Huffman property, Huffman dealerships. But anyway, I would encourage you to stay on track with that. One of my 3 major assignments when I was hired into the position I just mentioned was to develop a preliminary alignment for that entire highway. And subsequently, as Rob is aware, the county then hired a consultant after we purchased the rights of way that we felt we needed, hired a consultant to refine that alignment, and it eventually was built. Now, that was almost 30 years ago, and it took more than 25 years to build that leg. And the reason I say that is, obviously, there's a great deal of competition for county funds, such as education and other safety needs and so forth that you have to balance out. But back to the purpose that I'm here, you do have some surplus land. One of those properties, and it was very visionary on the part of that Board of County Commissioners at the time, we purchased from a willing seller what was known as the Keene property, Dr. Keene's property, which is on the west side of that roundabout. And that allowed us to connect the dots there. On the east side was what was known as the Keyvolver property, and you might remember an old stone house that sat up there for years. And several county commissioners over the years came to me and kept encouraging us, we need to sell that property. We're not using it. I said, sit tight, gentlemen. That property is going to be very important at someday to the county. So all I'm saying to you is you do have some surplus property out there. You have what was termed the road to nowhere when I was your public works director, and that was Robin Wood Drive. We acquired property from the college, and we have property sitting just off of Jefferson Boulevard. See, I still say we, and it's 9 years later. So you, we as a county. But I would encourage you to be very cautious and to work closely with your staff, because somewhere down the road, once you sell those properties and structures are built on them, you close the door to future transportation needs that are very, very important to our county. And of course, we had for years talked about that being as a quote, Funkstown bypass. And Governor Glenn Denning was very, very opposed to bypasses. He felt that they were pro-growth and that they cut off a lot of local businesses. Southern Boulevard does not do that. So we had an Eastern Boulevard and we had Burhan's Boulevard. So we got together and we talked and we said, we're going to start calling it Southern Boulevard. So that's how it got its name. So at any rate, long-winded testimony, but thank you very much for that project. And I would encourage you to keep up the good work in that area. And thank you for all that you do for us. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Any other citizens who'd like to participate, come forward. Welcome. For the record, name and address, sir.
Hi, my name's Jeb Eckstein. I live at 13 East Baltimore Street in the town of Funkstown. I'm here in support as a private citizen and not as president of Fair Play of all the funding requests that are going through. I've been a volunteer firefighter at one capacity or another for over 40 years. I'm tired. I'm getting older. There's no people coming in like there used to be to back us up. 30 years ago, we could sport an entire softball league made up of 8, 10 teams in the county and still get every piece of apparatus out. I doubt many of us today could put an entire softball team together. Lifestyles are changing. Everything in our world is changing. People don't have the time or the commitments. Your own facility here is changing. 20 years ago, we didn't have an armed security guard out front. Things are changing. We've talked about this for years and years and years. And in short, it's time for action, no more talking. We need the funding. The citizens, my family, everybody's families should expect that every response is going to be answered. Our failure rates are increasing. We're doing the best we can. We're digging into our pockets. We're paying people. We're doing what we can. We need the help now. In my opinion, for doing this for 40 years, we've reached a critical level. While some departments are doing good, that's not going to last. Good for them. Everybody's doing the best they can with what they've got. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Any other citizens in the gallery who would like to participate? Seeing none, I'd like the commissioner's permission maybe to come back at 10:30 to request if there's anybody at late arrivals. If not, we could move forward with our next agenda item if the people from the landfill are here to present. Please come forward. Rick Curry, please.
Good morning. Rick Curry, Director of Purchasing. Before you is PUR 1403. It's a contract award for landfill inspection services. Recommended motion, move to award a contract for landfill inspection services to responsible proposer, BAI Group, LLC of State College, Pennsylvania, with the lowest proposal of $267,300 based on the estimated quantities and unit price in the proposal dated December 12th, 2018. It's an as-needed inspection services that does not guarantee a minimum or maximum number of hours for testing procedures. The approval will be upon the contract agreement approved by the County Attorney's Office. As you can see in the RF, some of the services that will be inspected are landfill capping, leachate collection, building construction. It's a no minimum maximum guarantee contract, 1 year with 4 renewal options. The proposal was advertised in local newspaper on the various websites as listed in the ARF. You can see in the ARF also what the coordinating committee was comprised of. We've received 2 proposals, and funds are budgeted in divisions, operating budget for the services. Also, you have a price proposal metric in front of you from the various proposers.
Just help me understand one thing. That first paragraph, it says, proposal dated 12/2018 with inspectors utilized on an as-needed basis. The part it sort of throws a red flag to me, and I'm sure you'll be able to explain it really good, is no guarantee of minimum or maximum numbers of hours or testing procedures and contingent upon approval of the contract agreement. Explain that to me. So the 267, is that fixed or could that go up substantially, or?
That depends upon the work that will require the department.
Isn't there a cap somewhere? What if they come and said it's 400,000? That's just my question. Maybe I'm off base.
What we do is, the 267 is based on a created project just to have a benchmark to compare the proposals. We are given hourly rates for each of the personnel we require.
Yeah.
And then before each job, we'll hand them a scope of work and say, using your hourly rates and the length of the contract. And
it just didn't seem like we were protected very well on a price, but it can.
We are. I mean, the 267, that's for like one project, but
It's just a scenario. So we have
it's a scenario. Yeah, so we can compare the proposals. I mean, each bid is based on hourly rates, and we kind of came up with a fake job, if you will, just so we can.
I understand.
Compare.
Scenario.
Right. So with every job that we need them, we will ask them for a proposal for each job.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Makes sense to you, Kirk?
Commissioners, any questions? Is there a motion for the recommendation as written?
I'll make the motion for approval.
You have a first. Is there a second?
Second.
A first and a second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All not in favor, say no. 5-0. Thank you very much. I think I saw one or two people may have come in late. Is there anyone else here for citizens' participation? Seeing none, with the commissioner's pleasure, I'd like to go ahead and begin the emergency service overview if everyone is here, Mr. Hayes, that you need. Morning, gentlemen. Name and address for the records, please. Thank you.
Good morning. David Hayes, Director of Emergency Services, 1222 South Point Drive, Hagerstown.
Bob Moncrief, President, Washington County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association, 7509 University Road, Boonesboro.
Kingsley Poole, Chair of the Emergency Services Advisory Council, 14008 Weaver Avenue in Morgansville.
And Commissioners, we're here today to provide an additional overview and update of the emergency services that we've spoken about in past over the last several months and the difficulties that the volunteer fire and EMS departments are having in maintaining adequate staffing levels and the financial struggles that are associated with that and other purchases that they've got. So we'll go ahead and move through the ARF as long as that's okay. And the report in brief is as follows. As county volunteer fire and EMS departments continue to struggle with recruiting and retaining volunteers, the Washington County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association, also known as the WCVFRA, and the Washington County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association Chiefs Committee, and the Emergency Services Advisory Council, also known as ESAC, and that's a commissioner-appointed board, have all voted unanimously to endorse a recommendation that the commissioners move forward with the implementation of Phase 2 of the Strategic Firefighter Staffing Plan. The 5-phase Strategic Firefighter Staffing Plan was adopted by the Commissioners in October of 2017. The discussion is the Board and County Commissioners, also known as the Board, has long maintained financial support to the independent volunteer fire and EMS departments throughout the county. Without this financial support, the volunteer fire and EMS companies would likely be unable to maintain operations in today's environment. To summarize, the board currently provides direct financial contributions of $48,000 annually to the fire and EMS stations outside of the city and $24,000 to the fire stations inside the city for a total annual contribution of $1,303,200. There are 15 fire stations outside the city and 2 EMS stations who also receive a $25,000 staffing subsidy annually, and that's totaling an additional contribution of $430,625. Each EMS company also receives an EMS staffing subsidy, which varies and is based upon net billing revenue for each department. The countywide EMS companies receive EMS staffing subsidies of $2,026,000 annually. The board also provides indirect contributions to the companies by funding yearly ladder, pump, and hose testing and cardiac monitor/defibrillator maintenance contracts that are administered through the Division of Emergency Services. The commissioners also fully fund a full-time position for a recruitment and retention coordinator who works directly for the Washington County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association. The Division of Emergency Services employs 8 full-time firefighters who work on our Special Operations Station. We also employ 8 full-time paramedics that operate advanced life support chase vehicles and the 23 part-time firefighters who work throughout the county in support of the volunteer fire stations during times of staffing shortages. Workers' compensation and LOSAP, which is the Length of Service Awards program for the volunteer workforce, is funded at an annual cost of $1,280,600. I'm sorry, the workers' compensation and LOSAP programs are funded at $1,280,600 annually. We also provide funding for EMS pharmacy charges, firehouse software, firefighter personal protective equipment, which is turnout gear, fuel maintenance and utility reimbursements, vehicle property casualty insurance coverages, physicals for volunteer responders, and other associated programs that support the volunteer departments. All totaled, the Board of County Commissioners provide over $7,156,680 of annual assistance to the 26 volunteer fire and EMS companies throughout Washington County. As the emergency services system in Washington County continues to experience annual increases for request of service, coupled with the additional financial challenges, which are staffing apparatus and facilities, it has now become necessary to consider additional efforts to assist the volunteer departments in meeting their needs. Currently, the Division of Emergency Services has received requests from 4 volunteer departments who are seeking county assistance in meeting today's challenges. 3 of the requests for assistance come from fire departments, which are Potomac Valley, Funkstown Volunteer Fire Company, and the Community Volunteer Fire Company. The 4th request for assistance was brought forward by the Smithsburg Emergency Medical Services. Each of the requests identified above involve issues related to the need for career staffing and the associated costs. While we move forward, it should be recognized that there are some fire and EMS departments that would embrace additional funding for corporation staffing, while many others are simply asking that the county begin the process to relieve them of the need to employ their own career staffing for their fire and EMS stations. And further in our effort to identify the necessary steps to assist the volunteer departments, we have prepared a brief survey that will be sent to all fire and EMS stations. The survey will solicit the department's input on what staffing the department may need or how to best address their other associated needs. We will be sending separate surveys to the fire and EMS departments as the staffing configurations between each is somewhat different. If additional full-time firefighter staffing is desired by the commissioners, our office recommends executing an application for staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grant, also known as SAFER. The SAFER grant is a program provided through the Federal Emergency Management Agency and is intended to help jurisdictions in need of additional firefighter assistance. It is expected that the grant period for the calendar year 2019 will open in the next several weeks and normally has less than a 30-day window for submission. If a SAFER grant submission is made and subsequently awarded, the anticipated timeline for the award notification should be around June of 2019. The Division of Emergency Services has positioned itself ready to make application if given such direction. With consideration of the EMS staffing shortage, we continue to seek input from the 8 EMS companies on a collective approach moving forward. At present, it is understood that some EMS companies may want an increase in the staffing subsidy, while others are seeking county assistance by assuming the responsibility for career EMS staffing within their stations. Unfortunately, the SAFER grant described above will not permit its use for EMS staffing. To fully implement Phase 2 of the firefighter staffing plan, it will require hiring approximately 60 firefighters, while fully implementing Phase 2 of the EMS staffing plan would require hiring or absorbing up to 104 EMS staff, many of whom are already working for the volunteer EMS companies in the county. With any plan to absorb or hire additional county staff, it is imperative that we look at a phased-in approach that would bring an identified number of personnel on board over a specified period. Additional program development should also occur that further promotes incentives for our active volunteer fire and EMS responders. These efforts prove invaluable in maintaining efficiencies within emergency services as we move forward over time. The commissioners continue to invest funding towards a volunteer stipend program which awards financial incentives to those active responders who schedule in-station duty shifts at the volunteer fire and EMS stations. There are other opportunities for similar program development that could be explored to further promote volunteer responder interest. The fiscal impact for implementation of Phase 2 through 5 of the fire plan is $4.5 million to $9 million. Phase 2 of the EMS plan will require an additional $2.5 million. The concurrences are as stated, and the attachments are as stated within the ARF, and the alternatives are to continue with the current funding and staffing level. And with that, I would ask if President Moncrief would have any additional, or Kingsley Poole, who is the co-chair of the Emergency Services Advisory Council.
I think we're in a very touchy situation here. We don't want to drive the volunteers away by hiring paid staff, so we're going to have to do this in a very careful manner. And somebody brought me the other day, said, oh, if you pay the firefighters $1 more an hour than you pay the EMTs now, all the EMTs will bail out of the medic side and go become firefighters. And we can't afford that, so we're going to have to be very careful how we go about this plan, not to mess with our volunteers. But we need something. Just, the exact way to go about it, I'm not sure.
I agree with President Moncrief. We're in a very touchy situation right now, but things are critical as far as response goes. I've used this analogy before at other places. You know, you call for a pizza. If it doesn't get there, you know, so what? We'll give you two the next time. But, you know, if your house is on fire, if you have a family member having a heart attack, you need assistance as soon as possible.
And some of the things I would add to the discussion is while we're seeing an increase in the failure rates, I've said this before, one of the things that really is alarming, most alarming to me, is the number of times that we're sending apparatus out driver only and just as importantly understaffed. And that leads to the possibility or the increased possibility of poor decision making by somebody that absolutely means well, but ends up having a bad outcome because we send too few people too many times to an emergency. It's gonna, the moon and the stars are gonna align. I'm not sure if the commissioner are interested, but we have representation from several different departments back here that may have additional information if you care to hear.
Can I ask a question, Jeff?
Sure, go ahead.
Dave, I don't think there's one of us up here don't agree. And I also agree with the citizen participation gentleman that, I mean, I think he had points that we all already know that. What sticks in my mind a lot is the initiative you took. We're back to this insurance thing. You saved a lot of money.
Right.
I just like to see, you know, I'm in, but I'd like to see what is your accountability for every, I mean, how do we know where all the money is? I mean, is there a good accountability, good fiscal records, or?
Right. So, and Sarah may want to weigh in on part of this. She's probably as well versed as I am. Annually, each department is required to submit a financial statement to the Office of Budget and Finance. And of course, they obviously file their 990 online, and anybody can look at that through GuideStar. And one of the conversations that we've had is as we put additional programs, whether that's a program and or money, is to make sure that we build the accountability section into that. So you heard me talk about several programs, the ladder pump and hose testing program, the personal protective program, the PPE. Those are administered through our office, and not that the volunteer companies can't do that. It's a twofold approach. One is to try to relieve that burden of them of have to actually go out and purchase that and distribute it, but just as importantly to make sure that we can be accountable, that especially with ladder pump and hose testing, that it's being done and we have the records to back it up if we had a bad event. Now, the cash contributions, I can't tell you yes or no to that question because we don't have any stipulations on that money. That's a general allocation, and I believe that $48,000 has probably been in place at that number for I would say over 20 years, at least as far back as I can remember when I've been at the top of some pie chart. And so is there room to be improved in the accountability side? I would advocate there is. And we can look back to history, and again, not looking to throw any darts at anybody, but we've had issues throughout history where there's been some pretty significant black marks that have been brought forth on the service because of either mismanagement or misappropriation of funds. So I think it's imperative upon us as we move forward with programs that we are good stewards of taxpayer money and implement those checks and balances without question for any new money.
And so that's definitely on you. I think you just summed it up there at the end. Good stewards of the taxpayers' money. So you're very aware and you're moving toward.
Right. And we're trying to look at all the programs and make sure that we're getting the maximum efficiency out of those. If that's those programs being administered by 26 individual departments because it's cheaper, then so be it. But if it's using the leverage of county staff and or purchasing power or the aggregates or even workers' comp or something along that line, then we should be looking at those as well. And so all of those things are on the table, and we've had that discussion with every meeting with the Volunteer Association, their Chiefs Committee and their EMS Committee. Is, we've got to make sure our house is in order for the money we already have before we can go back to the well and say we need more. And I shared that with you, and I'll share it here. I don't have it in this handout, but the EMS billing rates and the disparities amongst the 8 companies across it, that's problematic for me sitting here before you telling you that we need millions more dollars when we don't have that part of our house in order. Now, I believe we have consent to get there, but we have to actionize that. So those types of things have to come forward.
Thanks, Dave. And Bob, I agree with you. We got to take care of our volunteers. We can't run them off. So.
First, is there any negative side of applying for the SAFER grant?
So I don't know that I can answer the negative side. Let me try on the positive side before we go to the negative side. So the benefits of the SAFER grant, if we're going to actionize firefighters, is that for 2 years, the federal or FEMA covers 75% of the cost of those firefighters, including the benefits. So we're only on the hook for the 25%. The third year, it reduces. We get 65% of that burden. They have 35%. And in the fourth year, they're all ours. So the negative side is eventually that runs out and they become, owners. The ownership of the payment is the county's. But what it does allow you to do is bring a larger group of firefighters on board that you may not be able to afford year one. But if you're going to take the approach that we're going to bring this in over a couple years, at least financially, you may be able to bring the firefighters on a little early. And certainly, anytime we can latch on to federal funding to subsidize a program that we're launching, then I think it behooves us to be on that swing.
Is there a minimum or a maximum for the SAFER grant?
There's not.
It is a one-time grant application, though.
Yeah, so you can only have one SAFER grant, successful SAFER grant in place at a time. So 4 years later, you could reapply. But during the interim time, if you brought 8 firefighters on this year and applied and executed the SAFER grant, and then next year you wanted to bring 20 on, you can't get the 20 on board that grant. So these are all things you want to think about if you're even having that conversation in your mind. How aggressive do you want to go? Where do you want to be in 4 years? That's really the question I would put forward, is where do we want to be in 4 years? What's the number we think we have or we're willing to agree to? Because we can probably get there sooner by exercising the SAFER grant and then building our payment plan, so to speak, over a 2 to 3, 4 year period.
You also mentioned the workers' compensation. From the way I understand, that's right now is we fund it, but it's each individual department has their own workers' compensation. Is that something that you believe we could find a significant savings in if the county used their purchasing power, using all of them, and then we instead of just putting it out to the counties, we brought it under one plan?
So there's 2 workers' comp discussions, I think, in that statement. First is the volunteer workers' comp program. That is purchased and funded through the county collectively, so we provide that through the county to the volunteers. The second one is each independent corporation and employee staff, meaning corporation staffing. They're responsible independently for that workers' comp. So that's where you get into some of the inefficiencies in purchasing, because if a single department suffers a significant injury and loss, that goes up. But the other departments may not suffer that. But if that loss is in an aggregate pool, the damage to all departments is less. I don't think we can purchase that, at least not what I'm understanding, that side of the coin for the volunteer departments. But I know that there's been an exploration for a, and the name's escaping me, it's a public, that's it. So, but I don't know where that is at this point and what the cost would be. But again, part of the problem is if the county doesn't fund that nugget, then you'd have departments buying into that might have a better workers' comp rate now, that when they go into the aggregate pool, they might have an increase. So I think the problems with that sit along the question is, would the county fund that if they did that? And then there potentially is a savings.
Dave, I have a few questions about the SAFER grant. It's encouraging to see that we could potentially be in the running for this upcoming year for the SAFER grant. When's our window of opportunity close for that?
So historically, and we've looked at this every year since I've been here because we've had similar discussions about what we saw a potential need. It normally opens the first week of January and closes either the last week or the first week of February. But I'm going to believe, because we're not seeing anything online about the open announcement yet, that the government shutdown has delayed that process. And I don't know what that answer is. It could come out tomorrow. But we, 2 weeks ago and even just last week, Googled and tried to find anything that indicated that they're talking about opening that award or that application announcement period up. But we haven't seen it yet. But
and then the second part, I see in your write-up, and I've heard from companies myself, some companies might prefer additional funding going to them and they hire their own staff. Some companies might prefer that we provide county employees to do that task. Does the SAFER grant, would both methods qualify for the SAFER grant?
No, they would not. We would be responsible for the SAFER grant application and the ownership of those employees, unless somebody knows differently, but anything I've seen, the answer is no. The other side for us is there's a second component to this particular program, and it actually allows you to make application for equipment and things. The volunteer corporations can apply to that, but we can't, at least not currently the way we're structured, until we actually have a first due fire response area and we own a Class A engine, and then we potentially can go to that side of the well and look at those funds as, collectively too. But that is one of the problems with that. And remember, we can't address the EMS issue with SAFER grant funds. So this and by itself isn't going to be a funding solution that's going to be promising across the board, but it is potentially an offsetter, or at least an offsetting funding source for part of it. And I've got some ideas of how to fund some of that 25 and 65% over a period of time here that we have to play out a little bit farther, but there may be some conversations we can have there to make that impact somewhat less as well.
Earlier, you guys talked about the impact on the volunteers. Has there been a discussion on how this is going to affect? Because as we know, we're going to have to employ other firefighters, and I'm assuming that we're going to have some that are volunteers are going to move over to work, and so we didn't actually add an additional body. We just moved somebody to full time, and the volunteers right now are a huge portion. But as you guys have already admitted, this is it's not sustainable at this point. So how are we going to be able to manage that period of the change?
Yeah, I think it goes back to really our presentation in October of 2017. Anytime you introduce a transitional plan, which is what we're talking about here, there's going to be that fallout of some component that's going to be affected, and we're going to have to move through. We're going to have to move through this volunteer transition at some point. We're probably here now. That's why this is written as a phase plan and not all at once. There's 3 other plan or phases after phase 2 that start to put more career staff in there as the need brings itself forward. I didn't think a little over a year we'd be sitting here talking about phase 2 when we presented the plan in October of 2017. So it's hard to predict what that impact's going to be and how quickly we're going to have to manage through that. That may be something we can control with additional volunteer incentives. And one of the things I'm a strong believer in is where we can, we should decrease the workload if it's administrative and those types of tasks that many of these people didn't sign up for. And we're talking about one of them, and that's an HR component with employee and staff. And then you've heard me say this before, both the old that's been with me for a few years and the new. The one thing I struggle with is asking volunteers to go out and flip hamburgers and have bingos to pay somebody to do the same job they signed up for. So if we're not going to employ staff, I would advocate we need to provide enough funding that they can pay the staff. And that's just my position. Doesn't mean I'm right, doesn't mean I'm wrong, but I think when you look at that and we're asking people to raise money to pay firefighters to do the same job, there's something fundamentally wrong with that in my eyes. Because the system, the demand for the number of hours that they need covered has grown beyond what the $25,000 will cover.
Mr. Baker?
Yeah, on the SAFER grant, did you say it was a 3-year program? 2 years at 75, 1 year at 65? And
Yes.
So what's the stipulation on that grant? So if, say you hired 18 people, so you gave me the percentages. So how long are we required to keep that staffing of 18 beyond the?
I do not believe there's a retention clause in it.
That's the word I want, retention. Okay. And then the other thing, back to the information you've provided, and I'm just trying to understand. I'm sure this was all under maybe since I've been a county commissioner, why do we only give $25,000 subsidies to, what was it, 2 EMS stations received 25,000, and then the 15 fire stations?
So that
Why wouldn't they all get 25,000?
You want to speak to that? Yeah. So the 15 fire stations that were given the $25,000 subsidy was brought forth back in 2014 when the association wrote the first edition of a fire plan. And it had a multi-phased approach in it as well. And in phase one was give us some money, let us try to work on this problem ourselves. That $25,000, Commissioner Baker, came about in that particular presentation. 2 EMS companies have asked for that $25,000 inclusion because they also operate, in addition to EMS transport units, they operate a rescue squad. Now that has changed. Community Rescue Service has since, effective January 1st of this year, ceased to run the rescue squad. And I want to clarify, just so that the community doesn't get confused, the rescue squad is not their EMS transport business. They're still fully functional in that. That's still moving. This is the big truck that they use to help cut people out of vehicle crashes and support fireground operations. So, and that was a point of misunderstanding, I think, in previous positions.
Question. Where do we go from now? I enjoy seeing you three sitting there. I want to make sure we're concerned about the volunteers, that we correctly apply for the right safer grant. Where do we begin with meeting with all the fire companies and ESAC and association and DS to start informing and getting communications going? Is that the next step?
You had talked about community meetings.
Yeah.
We talked about having community meetings to get the public involved with this, to understand more what we're doing. We're still working on other initiatives to try and cut costs ourselves. One we got right in the process now is trying to figure out how to convert all our stations to LED lighting to cut the power bill costs. You know, lots of little things.
Pardon me.
But, you know, but the big thing is we just, you know, we got to help them out right now a little bit, at least a few companies, to get them over the hurdle.
And many of the departments are saying, you could give us more money, but we can't manage this staffing plan anymore on our own. So again, goes to the thing, I think some companies are simply asking, you know, relieve us of this task and bring the county firefighters on board. And again, I look at this, you can see the patches on my sleeve, but I don't care. I just simply don't care. We're all one team. We heard it in State of the County this morning that the success of the team is not any one individual. It's not the Division of Emergency Services. It's not the volunteers. So we have to work together to bring emergency services back up to a sustainable capacity.
I think what President Klein is getting at, and I think that what I'm on the same page is, I mean, we can talk for the next 6 months, but we're running out of time. I mean, we need to make something happen pretty quick. I mean, instead of keep kicking it down the road and talking about it. I know you got to have informed, based everything on information, and I understand that. But you know, I'm no further ahead in my mind than I was 2 months ago. So I think accelerated, and I know that's not wise sometimes when there's money involved, but I think we need to get it done. I mean, if I was to put you on the spot, which I probably will, if Dave Hayes, I mean, it's phase 2, obviously somewhere in phase 2, I've heard stories from different personnel. Do we need a complete phase 2, which we maybe or maybe not can afford, or will we moderate a phase 2? Because it's not going to happen overnight.
Right. So here would be my answer, and I'm glad you asked that question because I missed that in the presentation. The commissioners could authorize funding for all of phase 2 today. We could not actionize all of phase 2 today. We can't hire 60 firefighters at the Division of Emergency Services probably within the first year. So to answer it, I don't think we need the entire phase 2. We're going to need a portion of it for those that truly need the help now and those that want that transition to occur, which is a good thing. It allows us to grow into phase 2. I think what we need from you and what I would ask as your director is tell me where you want us to be. Are we, if you're in consent that we need to move forward with a staffing initiative, phase 2, we'll work with county staff and budget and finance and what it would look like, because these are big numbers, and I recognize that, and I'm not going to ask you to pay for that here today. We cannot do that. But I think what I would look for, and I won't speak for the administrator or the CFO, is some type of direction that you want us to move and develop the final details of that plan and how we would phase this phase 2 staffing plan in over a period of time. Let us define the time, at least initially, based on conversation with budget and finance and how we'd pay for it. And I don't know if I'm not putting Rob on the spot, but.
So from a 30,000-foot perspective, there's a number of things going on here. And one is that you've got fire and rescue, and then you've got emergency services, medical services as well. When Dave talks about phase 2, it's not, that doesn't cover your EMS.
That's correct.
So what staff has done in the past under the direction of prior boards is there was a study for EMS and there was a study performed for fire and rescue. Fortunately, we have that information that says what the needs are, assessments, and so forth. They have, while not entirely always perfect, those studies did provide some guidelines, and they are in place. That's where phase 2 for fire and rescue comes from. So then what we need as staff is to determine whether the board chooses to continue toward a hybrid approach, which is what you have now, which is both staff and volunteer, or if you're looking to go entirely volunteer, which could happen. Your current staff, you could continue to use them for support, or you can want to go entirely toward a staff operation. Other locations I've been told in listening to the experts on the subject matter, Kingsley, Bob, Dave, and others, is that, for instance, other counties have tried to do the hybrid system, and they've gotten along with that, and they've eventually gone to an entire staff approach. That doesn't mean we can't do the hybrid here. If what I'm hearing is we need to continue with a hybrid approach, but figure out the details in exactly how that's worked out. I also think that from hearing both sides that we have to have some accountability that's consistent across the board that can try to take savings and reinvest those savings into the programs. That means volunteer programs, that may mean some staff program. But all the commissioners I know have been strongly in favor of the volunteer efforts, and that is where their hearts and minds seem to lie first and foremost, that the volunteers have the belt and suspenders approach with the volunteer system. Sometimes that may mean additional staff. That's what I'm hearing from the experts as well. We do have already in place 23 part-time firefighter and 8 full-time firefighters. So they are filling in where the needs are. But if I'm reading it correctly, they aren't enough to continue, and that's why you have letters of request here for additional support. So we also have 8 full-time paramedics. Okay, so you have 2 columns here of fire and rescue and emergency services. We have money going to both. We have some staff going to both. We have opportunities for perhaps more efficiencies in both. And it does seem like the system needs to move forward in a hybrid type approach is that what we're hearing?
Yeah, that's really the report I'm trying to present here, is for 2 reasons. One, the economics of it, but the second, the actual practical implementation of it. We need to do exactly that. We can't bring all staffing on board now. And then likewise, I mean, I'm going to continue to advocate that we reach in our pockets and figure out how we can further incentivize the volunteers. I don't want to dismiss that this is completely a career initiative. That's not it. But that, unfortunately, is the big cost that we're talking about. But, when we're talking about the volunteer corporations, I'm supportive of additional funding to those as well, and that may be a systemic approach, not just to certain departments, because that 48,000 has not changed for a period of time, and it may be time to address that as well to help out with general operating expenses. But any of that certainly should come with, you know, an attachment of accountability, and I think we can lay that forward without question.
Well, they're taxpayer dollars, and that's the key word.
Right.
That any taxpayer dollars we have to look at the same, that they have to be measured and reported upon just like any other taxpayer dollar, whether it's going to staff or anywhere. Our grants management office is charged with doing that for grants that go out that are for any number of nonprofit organizations.
Right.
So that's consistent and required for financial reasons. But the other big matter here is that I look to Sarah, we have a funding request, even if it's not at 4.5 and 2.5 for emergency services, there will be funding needs that we will have to either reduce something in the budget to accommodate these needs, or we will have to find additional funding somehow. The 200,000+ that we found, and Dave and I think HR was involved in that, in their insurance people.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy was
She
was at the front of the train.
Tracy was very large in that. Those will help, but those are probably not going to make it entirely, and that's the difficult pill to swallow here. So we can come back with a more structured approach. We're simply looking today to see that we are coming together as a team volunteer with Dave's office, and I really appreciate Kingsley and the recent emails you've been sending me twice a day. Those really are enlightening as to what's going on both throughout Maryland and through the country in emergency services.
And for the record, those are firehouse.com and the Eastern Division Fire Chiefs. It's all the news locally, statewide, nationally in the emergency services.
Mm-hmm. And
I've got just one other question and then a comment, an action item. The first is with this SAFER grant, if we apply, and I'm just going to throw out a number, 12 firefighters, okay? That first year, again, I'm just spitballing, that first year, if we don't hire 12 firefighters, does that, or do we eliminate that 2 positions? I mean, not get funded as, you know, what I'm trying to find is, do we shoot a little bit higher and understand that we're going to get these people over 2 or 3 years, you know, over 18 months, is it? Or do we have to hire them immediately?
You have to hire them immediately. You have a window, and I think it's about 6 months to actually.
And that what I suggest is an action item. I'm not a person that I think people are realizing this. I don't like to sit on things. If we can make a decision, let's do it, and let's start to move this ball instead of continuing to talk and talk and talk. I would suggest that we have a meeting early next week, and you reach out to all the departments and ask them what their want is, because we have actions to say we need funding, we need this. Well, what is that number? Is it a dollar figure? Is it a fire person? Is it a part-time? What is that number? What do they need? And we have a meeting next week that we can sit down and figure out what these needs are that those each volunteers have, so we actually have an actionable item, and then we can look at applying for the SAFER grant at that point. Because let's stop talking, let's start doing.
Yep.
With a looming deadline for the SAFER grant not confirmed, I agree we should take some type of structure.
And I'm going to think we're going to have at least 3, hopefully 4 weeks whenever it's announced, and it's not announced yet. So the timer hasn't started, and I think you're absolutely on board with where our office would like to be, is let's identify which departments would like to have staffing and which departments need financial assistance relative to money, and what are those dollar figures. And that's actually, I don't know if you had a chance to look deeper in the packet, there's 2 surveys back there, and those questions drive directly to that.
Exactly. And I would bring it along and say, what are the wants and what are the needs? You know, what do I actually need and what do I really want?
Right.
So, but it's something I think the commissioners, we keep hearing about it on about. We all know it's the gorilla in the room, but nobody's willing to take an action. So let's move. And I would suggest, and I'll throw it out there, get it out there so that next week, next Thursday, we have a meeting, we sit down and let's start moving this ball.
What is what's the positive or negative? What's the odds we'll get this SAFER grant? I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I mean, it's hard to predict, but I'll give you an example. Frederick is applying again. Now, Frederick already has 300 or 400 firefighters. We're a
Right.
county that is just beginning, we're just born, so to speak, in that world. So I believe our odds, we're the kind of county that grant is designed to be given to. Now, it still goes to large municipalities. I mean, you'll see
Right.
DC and all of those will get it as well. But Allegheny just got a grant. They got this exact grant, I think 8 firefighters. Frederick is 2 years ago got 40, 3 years ago got 42. That's expired now. They're going to apply again. I think I heard 60, I believe is the number they're going to apply again. So they're getting it around us. We actually have Frederick's application, and we're going to look at what they put in that and how it was formatted, and some of this will be changed the numbers. And if you use the same general approach, it was a successful grant before, you would expect that we would lead to the front of the pile, and especially when you put our run statistics in there, the number of departments that are having fail rates above 5%, and then the 20% driver only and almost 40% that are light. That's a strong statement in anybody's measurement.
And do we have a lobbyist or something to push that down, or do we have anybody that pushes that, or just submit it and?
It goes, yeah.
Yep. Yep, so we don't have any way to push it. Okay. Thank
And
you.
if I could, excuse me, make another point, once the grant expires, the local government is expected to pick up those people. You can't say, okay, thanks for 3 years, we'll see you. So
But there is no retention requirement.
there is no retention requirement, but they're generally expected that.
The ideal is this is the launching board, for initiatives, and try to defer that.
Dave, could I get a list of all of the, requirements that are associated with the SAFER grant?
Sure.
I mean, does it diminish the roles of the volunteers in the companies? They can do this, they can't do that, they can drive a truck, they can't drive a truck?
There's no requirements in there in any of that word with that grant.
Okay, and then the other thing, I'd like to, if there are, I'd like to get a list of them. And could we get some statistics on the EMS calls? How many times do we send a fire truck out on an EMS call because there's not enough EMS personnel?
Well, so some of that is in that statement, Commissioner, that we send them out in support of, but others is there are 15 fire stations, and if you count in the city of Hagerstown, there are 21, and they're much closer to the emergency than sometimes the transport ambulance is. So in those higher acuity calls, we want to get at least a basic level of service there as quick as we can, and the goal is to try to make a difference.
So
in
if
that
we were to
event.
do something for the EMS companies, would that decrease the need to send the fire departments?
I would not suspect that, no. No, I don't think they're related.
Okay.
I would like to address that as a staff, though, is we talk about the opioid epidemic, and I would venture to say that a large part of some of this issue is exactly what you've brought up, Vice President Baker, and response calls to some of those situations has increased the rate of call. The experts are here. Perhaps I'm wrong, but it seems to be inordinate. It's costing everyone for that situation. It's costing our volunteers and taxpayers.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair statement, without question. And if nothing else, you just simply apply it as call volume. And, I'll give you the personal experience. I may have shared this 20 years ago when I was a volunteer over at Williamsport Ambulance, and you remember those days probably because we came up and bothered you for a donation, but I was paramedic, a younger paramedic in those days, but I would run a chase vehicle from my house. Well, I could pull 2 or 3 duty shifts a night and have an opportunity that I didn't have to get up but 1 or 2 of those nights. That's not the case today. The call volume is 2, if not 3 times greater than it was. So people are less likely to run those overnights or volunteer to do those overnights because they still got to get up and go to work, and they're just tired. They're more tired. You're not able to do that. It's just a rule. It's mathematics. The more calls you got, the more times you're going to have to get up in the middle of the night. I worked a long time on a medic unit as a paid person, and I did not like even being paid and getting up at night. But I knew it was part of the job, so I probably much less like that as a volunteer. So,
How many chase vehicles do we have?
2.
Okay.
one in the west and one in the south.
Now, CRS and
We don't have any,
Smithsburg, sort of their duty supervisor also helps with chase vehicles.
If you're looking globally,
Yeah.
yeah, CRS has a 24-hour shift supervisor on that they fund, and then Smithsburg tries to provide what we call echo coverage, with as a second paramedic to those higher acuity calls, and that's in the eastern part of the county. And of course, they're up, as you heard in the previous presentation, in Franklin and Frederick County on a fairly frequent basis, as well as our friends in Hancock are, over into Morgan and Fulton.
and the only reason I brought that up was, and it may not have been the chase vehicles. I remember 6, 8 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I can't even remember, the county commissioners gave the authority for EMS to purchase vehicles or equipment or something, and then it was stored out at the Phoenix Color Corporation building for many, many years.
2007, that was actionized in 2009. So
Okay.
they sat there for almost 2 years.
Yeah,
You're right.
okay.
And we're using those folks to the fullest extent we can to bring to bear on this staffing problem, whether it's EMS or side. If we get an EMS station that's without staffing, where it doesn't sacrifice the global impact of the system, we'll move that county chase paramedic to that area to try to lessen the impact of no ALS in that particular area. In the South County, we've got that paramedic helping out at the Royersville station driving the fire engine sometimes. So we actually take that service, the paramedic level service, out. We carry some paramedic equipment on the engine, but we put them on the fire truck because we're trying to handle the first emergency. And that's just because the staffing situation has become that critical that we're really, I think, we talked about a robbing Peter to pay Paul in some of these cases. And the last thing I want to make sure we get on the table here, just for the record, is without question, this in no way diminishes the volunteer spirit and what they're currently giving to us. The volunteers are still there. Their hearts are still in it. They're just telling us today they can't do it alone. They're asking for help. They're not asking for us to replace them, and we have no intention to go down that road. And I know we're going to have a net effect to that, but the goal is to salvage and maintain that volunteer contribution to the fullest extent that we can. So.
Gentlemen, if no more questions, you have a proposal to bring us back something structured to begin moving forward.
Yep. You want that by next
Court,
week,
would
is that
be
correct?
accurate?
Yeah, if we could, I think, if
That's possible.
if we could, try to do it in as quickly fashion, my goal would be for next Thursday, if we could set that up and have a meeting. Well, I thought Tuesday, if you want to do it on Tuesday, that's fine, but let's actually get this done and talk through it, so we can start moving.
All right, thank you very much.
If it's not this Tuesday,
Maybe Tuesday a week or
tell us
something.
which
2 weeks.
what
2
Tuesday
weeks,
will
yeah.
work.
It'll be,
Well, there's no commissioners meeting
The
on the
following.
19th, I think.
if we could, we've been talking about this survey to go out and read and so forth, the companies. If we could be given 1 to 2 weeks to do that and bring information back, because it will probably take some real dialogue. It's not just a survey, but it's some dialogue, so it will probably take to the 26th.
Well, and what I was
come
saying was
back.
the initial meeting, I didn't think the initial meeting be brought up to all 5, but the initial meeting be at a staff level that we can, dissect this and go from there, because I think that it's going to need dialogue and a conversation. It's not just, here's the plan, yep, we're good.
Right, yeah.
It would be good to have more than one meeting.
True.
Many meetings, half-hour, hour meetings.
So that was my thought, is let's get the ball rolling. We can't sit here and continue to talk, or that's all we're gonna do.
Rob, you would think the 26th would be on the agenda?
On the agenda, yes, formally and officially, and then before that, we can certainly have a meeting or two, and we'll need those, I'm sure, to update commissioners and probably evaluate where we are. Yes.
Gentlemen, hearing no more, thank you.
All right. Thank you for the time once again. Appreciate it.
Commissioners, I think our next item is closed session, I believe, if I have.
You asked for, you delayed.
Any other citizens' participation? Anybody else come in late?
I don't think so. They're all
All right,
running.
thank you. I need a motion to go into closed session.
Motion to go to closed session?
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye.